Hello, friends of a love for volleyball, amor por el voleibol. Today I would like to introduce you to Sean Murray, the founder and president of the Real-Time Performance, a leadership training organization development firm. He's the author of the book, If Gold is Our Destiny, How a Team of Mavericks Came Together for Olympic Gold, a book that delivers an inside look at what it takes for a group of talented individuals to overcome the differences and become the best of the world and win the Olympic Games in 1984 in Los Angeles. After this brief introduction, who better than Sean Murray to tell us about his life? Hello, Sean. How are you?
Hi, Alfredo. I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on your show. It's a real honor.
Fantastic. And first of all, to start, Sean, please tell me about yourself. What do you do? And where did you grow up? Did you play volleyball in the youth or today? What is your occupation today?
Yeah, well, yes, your audience may be wondering, Real-Time Performance is the name of my firm, and I work in this area of leadership and organization development. I work with companies, mostly in the United States, sometimes in Europe, around culture and sometimes strategy and brand, but a lot of it's around culture and how people work together. And so, it's a little odd that I wrote a book about volleyball because I wasn't a great player. I did like to play. There weren't a lot of opportunities to play boys volleyball in high school and junior high. In fact, I write about that in this book. We can talk about that. But unless you lived in Southern California, and I didn't. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, near Seattle, about 4 hours south, but in the state of Oregon. And but now what I do is I help teams and people work together. And the reason I wrote a book about volleyball is I wanted to write about a team that became the best in the world. How did they do it? What did they do? What were the steps they took? What did they have to overcome? And there happened to be a team that I had a connection to through my father and Doug Beal, the coach of the 1984 USA men's Olympic team that won gold. And they had an interesting story. And so that's how I decided to write this book. And I ended up writing about the 84 team. And I still do this practice of helping organizations and teams.
Fantastic. And you said something about my next question is about how you came to the idea to write this book. You said something about it, but how you said or do you thought sometimes I want to write a book about my father's experience, about the volleyball history in the United States experience, and how they became. I can't remember.
It's kind of interesting.
19th in the world, and they became at a great time. They became the best in the world.
Yeah, the team has a very interesting story. I didn't really know the whole story until I got into writing the book. The reason I got to the decision, I came to the decision to write the book was, I guess it started with another book, and you may have heard of it. It's not about volleyball, it's about crew or rowing, and it's called Boys in the Boat, and it's about the 1934 USA men's crew team that happened to win a gold medal. It was at the Berlin Olympics, the Nazi Olympics and all that. And they beat the Nazi boat and all that. It was just a very much a underdog, come from behind story, a little bit like the 1980 men's hockey team, if you're familiar with that story. But, but so that book captivated me. And, I'm not really much of a fan of crew, but the way the story was told and how the team sort of came together, it was fascinating. And I thought, in my world, what I do in working with companies, I'm always looking for stories to learn, to teach. And I believe humans learn through stories. We enjoy telling them, listening to them. That's how knowledge is passed on. And so people, you can engage people's interest in a story. And so, rather than write a book, sort of an academic book about, Sean Murray's 5 steps to building a team or anything like that probably no one would ever read in the world, I thought to myself, why don't I really study a team? And instead of my opinion, why don't I just tell the story? And then once I tell the story, I can step back and say, okay, well, what did I learn from this story? And so, originally I thought I'd have some lessons at the end of each chapter, like here's the team lesson from this chapter, but that didn't really work out because it interrupted the flow of the story. And I decided, I just want to tell the story for the reader. The reader may not be interested in the stuff I'm interested in. They may just want to learn about volleyball and volleyball history and how this team came out of pretty much nowhere to win a gold medal. And so that's how I came to write the book. I'm really glad I did. I met some wonderful people and some players and people around that team. And now we have this book that has a little bit of history for an important team in the history of volleyball, really.
Absolutely. I when I read the book, I thought many things, but what you're saying, it's very important for because I think this book can be made as a movie because it's very entertaining, it's emotional. There's something about, for example, this famous outdoor experience. It was absolutely crazy for me to read this and how many players complain about this. The other player didn't go. It was fantastic, this experience outdoors and to climb mountains, to survive in the wilderness. Absolutely crazy and a fantastic story for a movie. So as I told you before outside camera, I was also lucky to have met personally Doug Beal, for example, and interview him and Chris Marlowe, two very important players and figures of this book and the story of this team. How was it for you to write and maybe have the opportunity to talk with them and to experiment and know firsthand about their history?
Well, that was one of the rewarding parts of writing the book, was getting to know Doug Beal. I did know him a little bit before I started writing the book. Our paths had crossed. The backstory for the listeners is that my father was the team psychologist, he called himself. He and a partner of his, Chuck Johnson, they were involved with the team to really there to help the team become a team or team building, build a culture, create systems for feedback and for corrections for the team to get better at communicating, trusting one another, that sort of thing. And so I had known Doug, and I called him up at one point and said, I'm thinking of writing a book. I'd love to write a book about your team of 1984. What do you think? And he was very supportive. And so that's how it started. And along the way, I interviewed all the players except for one. There's one, Craig Buck, who has had an injury since his playing days, and so I didn't get to interview Craig, but everybody else I did. And Chris Marlowe was definitely one of the characters. What I did not know Chris before this writing the book. I did not know his incredible story of his role on this team, and his story plays into the theme of my book quite well, which is how does a group of individuals come together, not just to become a great team, but the best in the world. And so we can talk about that. But Chris is an incredible ambassador for volleyball, really wonderful guy. And a little side note, you mentioned that the book could make a good movie. There is a group in Hollywood that's trying to shop this thing around and make it into, so who knows, maybe it will be made into a movie at some point.
Fantastic. Also, you said about Chris Marlowe, he's in the front page of the book, yes, holding the American flag, and as I told you, I have the opportunity to interview him. And he's also a reporter in basketball and the Denver Nuggets team, a very important champion of the NBA basketball league in the United States. And he told me many fantastic stories that are in the books, in the book. And also for me as a South American, as a Chilean volleyball ex-player and a lover of volleyball, it was very, very, very interesting to know more about them. And because maybe you don't know, but for people outside America, outside the United States, we look up to the United States because we're in the South. I don't know. We have this, I don't know how to say it, this complex of being a minor country, a minor culture beside what America means, especially today in sports, especially in economics and science. I don't know. And so for me, it was very, very, very interesting. I said this many times before, to know about the history. And also, I wanted to ask you about your father's work, because I met, for example, last year or this year, a Polish girl who works with a Polish team, making some things that your father do, team building, mental strength, and to speak with the players and the team. Please tell me about more what your father did, and I know this. Maybe there were pioneers for today team buildings and process.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, the Polish team and the woman who works for the Polish team, and that's become more prominent now than it was in the 1970s. And so my father, I think, was somewhat of a trailblazer in this, someone who pushed the boundaries in this. He got involved in volleyball almost by chance. There happened to be someone in his graduate school. He was at graduate school who ended up becoming a coach of the national team before Doug Beal, and he knew this person, and so they became friends, and he was asked to come work with the team. I mean, one thing about the volleyball in the 1970s in the United States was there was a lot of talent. Most of it was from Southern California. They didn't have a lot of history of playing together as a team very well. They would come together for a few months, practice a new group of players, a new team, and then they would go to South America or Europe and they would get beat. I mean, Argentina had a great team. Chile, I don't know if they were big in the 70s or not, but yeah, I don't remember that. But Poland definitely had a great team. The Soviet Union, Japan. I mean, these were powerhouses. Yes. Italy, Cuba was very dominant. So yes, these players had a history of being individually quite talented, but not working as a team. And so that's why he was brought in. And so some of the things that he did were, very basic things that nowadays you'd think, well, that makes sense. But, back then it was very much the coach is going to tell the team what to do and pretty much demanded that they do it. So they set up some feedback systems so the players could give feedback to the coaches. Here's what works for us. Here's what doesn't work. And then the coaches could get the players could get feedback from the coaches as well. They had meetings where they asked the team, what could we do on the court? How can we treat each other on the court to maintain our trust and our confidence when we're out there, because there's such big momentum swings in volleyball, as we know. So how do we want to handle it? Instead of just trying to figure it out on the fly, they actually spent time talking about that. And there was some players who would give sort of dirty looks, at someone who made a mistake. We've all experienced that, in volleyball. You go to do a pass and it ends up in the stands, and someone looks at you like, "What are you doing?" And they decided they weren't going to do that anymore, and we'd be very supportive, and just things like that. Individually working on goals, team goals. They asked for commitments. They did a lot of things to build trust. And in fact, that trip, the adventure into the wilderness that you alluded to was the biggest goal, I think, of that whole exercise was to build cohesion and trust. And so those were some of the interventions that the team psychologists performed in order to try to help the team get better.
I think it's amazing to know, and especially invite the people to buy this book, because this chapter, or many chapters, all the book tells in detail what Sean is telling us right now. It's absolutely amazing. And I remember also last year in the Hall of Fame ceremony in Holyoke, I met Silvano Brandi, who is also an Olympic Italian coach, and he told me a story about a Russian player he had in a team in Italy, Yuri Cepega. He passed away some times ago, but he was a fantastic player. But Silvano told me that he didn't talk. He listened, he plays, but he never talked with him. And Silvano Brandi, as many coaches from the West, wanted to speak with the players. After a while, after many months, he was able to speak. And I told Silvano that in Russia, this time in the Soviet Union, the players didn't talk. The coach set the directives, and the players said, okay, yes. If you say no, you got fired out of the team. So for me, it's very important to listen to what you're saying about your father's work, especially in team building and being pioneers and building or creating the systems to create a group, a team. Because, as you said, in the United States in the 70s, they were fantastic players, but they didn't communicate, they didn't bond as a team, and the results are obvious. And I wanted to ask you now, Sean, I also said it before our conversation, our recording, that I think the world was very shocked when we saw the final in Los Angeles '84, the Olympic final. We saw this team. We didn't know this players. Some Chilean players told me about the American team because they played against them in Argentina in '82, but nobody knows them. The world knows the Brazilian, the Russian, the Bulgarian, the Cubans, but nobody knows the American players. So here we saw this team with the special volleyball shoes that nobody also knows why they're using this type of shoes, volleyball shoes, and they beat the Brazilian, the best known team in the world. And how do you think this for the people who don't know the book, was it possible? How do you think a so good process helped the team to win gold in Los Angeles '84?
Well, it certainly was a shock. It was a shock to most of the world. You mentioned the 1982 World Championships in Argentina, and at that World Championships, the United States finished 13th, which is the best they could finish given that they didn't get out of their pool. And their pool included the Soviet Union and Bulgaria, and I believe it was Chile, right? You just mentioned that. Yeah. So they had to beat the Soviet Union or Bulgaria. They weren't going to beat the Soviet Union at that time. The Soviet Union had won the World Championships in '78, gold in '80, and then again the World Championships. They ended up winning the tournament in '82. They were a very dominant team at the time. The United States really was not playing at that level. They could not beat Bulgaria. They really had the talent to beat Bulgaria. They probably should have beaten Bulgaria. The Karch and a lot of the players, when I interviewed them, thought that they were going to. They were up. I don't remember the score exactly, but it was it was something like 13-6 or something like that. And they ended up losing the set and the match. And so it was a shocker. And that was a low point. And that's when they decided, we're going to have to do something different. We've got this opportunity to go to to be in the Olympics. That's another point. The United States had not been to an Olympics since '68. So there was a long period of just not being able to qualify. And that was a little humiliating for some of the players and coaches. Maybe you talk to Doug Beal about that. He kept saying, we invented the sport. We should at least be competitive in it, and they weren't. And so that's where they decided to make some different decisions. And I think my dad was involved in that, Doug Beal, Bill Neville, another coach. And they started to talk to the players and say, guys, we want to try some different things. One of the things that Doug said was we weren't afraid to look foolish. Because in any sport, when you're not doing well, that's the time to try new things, right? When you're already the best, you don't often change the formula up. But Doug said, we would try different things. And so that's where they said, let's try a group bonding experience, what they called a shared significant life experience together. Let's see if we could do that. Let's try putting two passers in the back to receive the serve. No one had tried that really successfully. They tried a lot of different. They built sort of a system that worked for their culture. That story you told about the former Soviet player that from Russia is a fascinating story, because that exemplifies sort of the culture in the Soviet Union at the time around sports. And so they built a program that was very successful in that system. Japan built a program that was successful in their system, and the United States tried to copy both of those systems, and that didn't work. And that's when they realized they were going to have to create their own system that really brought the best out and aligned with the American, I'd say, culture, or the vibe, or the style that the players wanted to play, because they came from the beach. And so these were some of the things that laid the foundation for that 2-year journey from 82 to 84, where they eventually shocked the world and won the gold.
Absolutely. And I must tell you that, for example, I have the opportunity to read something about Alexander Sabin from the Soviet Union. He wrote a book in Russian, and I'm helping his brother Andre, who lives in France, to translate it to English. And there's some fantastic chapter, especially one who tells about the tour that the Russian team made in the United States before the Olympics of Los Angeles, before the boycott. And he was very impressed about the sport in the United States, because he said, for example, that in his country, the stadium was not very full with people watching the games, but in the United States he saw all this, the merchandising, the show besides the sport, the cheerleaders, the music, and he told, and he wrote in the book, that for them it was very impressive to watch. And I also remember Chris Marlowe, in one interview you made when you were launching the book, he told about a chapter with another Russian player that he thought he was fleeing from Russia, but he wanted to buy something for his wife. And another thing about the Argentina experience in 82. In his book, he tells that somebody of the USSR embassy visited them in their hotel, and they told them they must win to let the US team out, but you must win 3-1 or 3-2. And the Russians said, no, get away from. We wanted to beat the American 3-3, and the Bulgarians are also. There's so many stories about the sports and this time. So that's what I think, that your book is so fascinating. I wanted to ask you another thing about this, because, for example, what I do, or the International Volleyball Hall of Fame in Holyoke is doing for many years, is to honor the stars from volleyball, players, trainers, and all these heroes from volleyball. As, for example, the NBA does, or they do, is to honor their past legends, the past stars, to build a future. So I think, do you think, for example, in volleyball, is it necessary to have more books like your book, to tell more stories and to help build the future? Because I don't know if the actual player from the United States team or Brazil knows about the story of the team from Kirali, from Timmons.
Yeah.
What do you think about this?
I think that's wonderful. I do think the sport needs more stories. It needs more books. It's missing. There should be more history written about this sport. And even when I embarked on this project, I was sort of amazed that there wasn't a lot of research I could do. Doug Beal wrote a very short book, kind of quickly wrote it after the Olympics. It was very much written almost like from one coach to another, very technical, a lot of scores, and it's called Spike, and it didn't sell that well, and so that was there, and that was a good resource for me. But yes, I am sort of amazed that there really isn't a lot of written about the history. A little bit about the beach. There've been a few more books written about beach, but and so I'm glad that the National Hall of Fame is sort of supporting this kind of work. I know they have my book back there. They're selling a few copies. And there has been more interest internationally in this book than I thought. So because I thought this team was probably limited, the audience was more limited to Americans that might be interested in the story. But it turns out, and I didn't know this, but in fact, you probably could elaborate more on this, that some of the innovative techniques that this team developed really became the standard of play for many, many years, the so-called American system. And so other countries, built on that, did their own version of it, and became even better than the US at it. But that it really sort of changed volleyball. And for that reason, I'm glad that at least we've got this book, and maybe there'll be a documentary or something else down the road for the historical record.
Yes, absolutely. For me, it's so important. And I think for many people outside America, it's important. That's why I asked you in some emails before, when will the Spanish version be released? Because I know many people would love to read this book, but in Spanish. Today, we have many applications via cell phone. We can read a book, but to read the book in our language, I think it would be fantastic. There's something about this, or nothing yet?
Nothing yet, but I have talked with my publisher about that. They've looked into it. They're trying to figure out what the market would be, maybe Portuguese too for the Brazilian market. And there's some interest in Italy, just because there's Italy and Poland. There's just so many, such a popular countries for volleyball.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's a market very interesting in knowing this history. You see, somebody in Chile is very interesting. How it is possible I'm sure that many other countries would love to read the book. And I wanted to ask you now, Sean, about some of your writing. Did you have some chapters that were more complex than other, or it was an easy task, or not easy task to write this fantastic book?
Well, writing it was much more challenging than the whole endeavor was much more challenging than I initially thought going into the project. I tried lots of different approaches. I'd say it's difficult to write a book about a team. I came to realize, because it's hard to tell a reader about 12 players and 3 coaches and 4 other players that didn't make the team. There gets to be too much. And so I realized I had to zero in on a few critical players and coaches and really make it help the reader identify with these players and their struggles, and then through them tell the story of the rest of the team. And I ended up focusing on Doug Beal because he had such an interesting story. Doug was the head coach of the '84 team, but he also was a player in the 1970s, and he was a player coach for a while, and he went through his own growth curve. And I think I did set out to write a book about a team, but I also ended up writing a book about leadership, I think, through Doug's leadership. And then what Doug has done since that team, I think, has only solidified his reputation and legacy as someone in world volleyball, in the volleyball world, that has really grown the sport and helped it mature. And so I did zero in on Doug. I also zeroed in on, of course, Karch Kiraly, who became the best player in the world, maybe was on the cusp of becoming the best player in the world at those games, but certainly later on did. And he had a very interesting story because of his father fleeing the Soviet tanks and army that invaded Hungary, where he was from originally, and a student during the Hungarian revolution, the Hungarian uprising, or whatever you want to call it. And so he had a very interesting background. He fled the Eastern European sort of crackdown there, and ended up in the United States becoming a doctor and raising the son who became this incredible volleyball player. And that's part of the American story, and then of course they end up facing off against these teams from the Eastern Bloc, we called it back then, teams that were sort of in the sphere of the Soviet Union. And so that, of course, and then Chris Marlowe, we mentioned that he has a very interesting story. So I would say once I figured out that I decided to write through a few key players and then try to tell the story in a way that where the players go through. I guess I learned in Hollywood, if you write a script, there's something called the all is lost moment. I don't know if you're familiar with this, Alfredo, but if you write a movie, there's always, some point where it looks like it's not going to happen, and so you have to kind of find these places along the way where it really did look like this wasn't going to work out, and things like that really keep the reader interested. And so I had to learn how to keep the reader interested, and so that was sort of my journey in writing the book, is going from just sort of telling a story to really telling an emotional journey of growth and development.
Amazing. And I have the book, and personally, I have some chapters that was very emotional for me as an ex-volleyball player. For example, the chapter 15, when you write about Olympic, the final, what they did, what were the emotions they have before the game, after the game, or for example, the chapter of what you said before, the difference between the East team, the West team players, and they were fantastic players, but they didn't work together because they were different. Okay, the volleyball beach players with all the style, the hippie style, I don't know, and the Westie or Eastie players who were more formal, I don't know, or the big side card, the friendship. I think for me, I have some favorites, but for you, do you have some chapter you realized today, wow, this was fantastic, I achieved a very good chapter? Or do you think all your book is for you as a child, everybody is fantastic? Or you have some chapter you say, okay, it's one of my best writings until now?
Well, I definitely related to the emotion of the final chapter, the Olympic chapter. I was emotional writing it. When I went back and read it, and I guess it was the emotion of the players when they described what they went through. That's what came out on the page. And of course, Karch also has Chris Marlowe has a very interesting quote where he's emotional about winning the gold medal, but he's also emotional about Brazil not winning the gold medal, which was kind of interesting because he had become friends with Rajman, who was a great player in his own right. And yes, I'm sure you know some of those players, Da Silva, Zondo. I mean, they were legends, and they had battled many times, the U.S. and the Brazilians, and the U.S. had never really come out on top. And so it's just, there was a lot of emotion there. There was several players who didn't make the team, who practiced for years, that were in the arena. There were players that deliberately left the team because they couldn't make the commitment, that were in the arena. So there was a lot of emotion going on there, and I tried to capture that. The other chapters that I think I really enjoyed writing and learning about were the chapters where they were in the wilderness, where they were in the Abajo Mountains in Utah. And I guess what I liked about that is I like to hike, I like to camp. I've never done anything as grueling as 21 days climbing up over 11,000 feet in a snowy peak in the middle of winter on snowshoes and snow camping, and some of the incredible things that they did. But I related to what, the suffering together and the personal growth, because they had to go off at times on their own for several days at what they called a solo and write in their journals. And to me, that was, there was something very, very much of a human, how we grow as humans and learn and get better. And we go through setbacks, and we have to sort of come to terms with our own attitudes and what's blocking us and what's preventing us from being the best we can be. And to me, those chapters really captured that. And they brought in some incredible instructors that ended up teaching the team things that the coaches couldn't teach, And so I think that's sort of the genius of this story, is that there were people that came in to sort of teach the whole individual. They wanted these young men to mature, and they had to, I think, to become the best. So anyway, those were probably my two favorites.
I agree with you absolutely. I think that these two chapters are amazing, and especially about what you said, also about the human part of the athletes. Because, for example, what I always try to do is look inside of the person, not only the athlete, the volleyball player. Because today we can see in YouTube many of the games, but to know the person behind the athlete, it's, for me, it's very important. And you I think you made it fantastic in your book. And I remember some, for example, some stories from, for example, from Pat Powers, this fantastic attacker, and he was eating his hot dogs before a game, and nobody knows what's happening with this guy. He prefers to eat a hot dog to play, for example, that, or maybe a part of the book where the team were playing against each other before the Olympics and almost go to fight because they're so competitive, they were so crazy to win that the same team, that all the work of bonding almost crashed because they wanted to win. So I think that so many examples of this book where we can find this, and especially also for me to, as a Spanish speaker, to know, for example, some words that it's very special for us. For example, to say Mavericks, because Maverick, we think Maverick, Tom Cruise in his movie, but Mavericks has another expression. Please tell me about more. I'm trying to translate it more accurately for people outside America.
Yes, that's interesting, because that word is very unique. It's not a word you hear a lot in English. It has of course, it was used in the Tom Cruise Top Gun movies. That was his call sign, right? Maverick. And if you remember in that movie, he's sort of an independent guy. He was working. He was listening to his own voice. He was not easily controlled by the generals and the officers, and that's what his flaw was. But that was also his genius, right? And so a maverick in American slang and English is sort of someone who is willing to go against the tide, to buck the trend, to not necessarily listen to the herd or the common, what everyone else is going right, they might go left. If someone's going to zig, they're going to zag. That's the definition of a maverick. And the reason I put that in the subtitle, which is how a group of mavericks came together for Olympic glory, is that I was trying to capture a sense of the attitudes of these players coming out of Southern California that, and I'm not saying anything they wouldn't say themselves about what they were like in their early 20s. They were very confident. They had big egos. They grew up playing on the beach. They were almost worshipped because they were just in incredible physical shape, and they were bronzed by the sun, and they were Greek gods. And they really weren't coached on the beach either. That's not something that Doug often points out. They would go play 2-on-2 volleyball tournaments all weekend long, and they were their own coaches. And then so Doug had to somehow coach these people. It's sort of the exact opposite of the player you described in the Soviet Union, right? I mean, that's kind of what Doug realized, was that, okay, I've got a different kind of person here. So how do I get these mavericks, these independent thinkers, these guys that aren't necessarily just going to do what I ask them to do? Because, Doug would say, let's do something, let's try this. And why? I know that's not good, but after they went through the outward bound, he'd say, let's try this. And they said, okay, let's try it. And so they sort of went through that transition. But yeah, that maverick, hopefully you can translate that one for me, Alfred. I don't know how, but that's kind of the gist of it.
It's so interesting because when you're saying this, I think, for example, in the book of Alexander Sabin, the book is named the Flying Elephant because they said to him a big flying elephant because he was so big. But also, and I think it's important for me, and I know many millions of people who love volleyball, to know more about your country. As I said before, for us in South America, in Chile, we watch your movies. Sometimes we go to the United States, but to understand the mentality or the way you're thinking, it's very, very different from our point of view of life. And also the Russian, the Soviet players, and he was Alexander Sabin was part of a Soviet era, of the Cold War era. So for them to play for the national team was part of his cause, okay? Not part of individuals, and otherwise he was part of a collective project, okay? So for me, it's very important to in your book, in this case, to understand how is it possible that that somebody, and we have seen this many times, as you said, in the hockey team movie or the basketball player stories, how they became from sometimes very poor people with a terrible background to be the best in the discipline, not only in sport. We've seen the story of, I don't know, Steve Jobs with Apple, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg in technology. But it's very, for me, it's very interesting. And I again appreciate that you give me your time to speak about this, because I think it's so important. History of sport, for example, is so important to build our future. So that's because I'm speaking with you today, not only because the book is fantastic, it's entertaining, it's very emotional as a player. And you said something also. I've met the Brazilian players. I think interviewed. I think most of the teams. I think 2 or 3. I didn't reach out, but they all tell me about this chapter in his life, because it was a very important and a big chapter for them. Yes. to lose against this team that nobody knows, but suddenly beat the ass of their best teams in the world. So I wanted to ask you about this revolution that you think began in Los Angeles in volleyball, United States. Do you think it was this was the peak of beginning of something new, or do you think that it began a little time before? What do you think about this in volleyball in the United States? Was Los Angeles '84?
Well, I think it was a turning point for the sport. The players sensed that going into the '84 games. Volleyball, especially men's volleyball, was languishing. It was not that popular. It wasn't filling the arenas. Maybe it was. Well, as they got closer to the '84 games, what Doug and the team was doing in San Diego, it was starting to fill some arenas and really getting some support. But so apart from that little area down there, in fact, I talk about the college that Chris Marlowe went to and how popular his team was in college and things like that. But as far as trying to compete with the NFL, with the NBA, with the Major League Baseball, it was a second tier sport. And so the players said, part of their motivation was, we've got to compete and play well in these Olympics so that this sport, we can inspire the next generation, and this sport can continue to grow in the United States. And they absolutely did that. And the women did a great job too. They did not win the gold. They lost to China. What's interesting about the women's story is, of course, Karch ended up coaching them starting 2016, I think. And of course, took them to their first gold, which was Japan. And so they had not won a gold before Karch. And so Karch is the thread through, 80, going all the way to 84 in his, what he was a part of as a player indoor, as a player on the beach in Atlanta and other Olympics, and then as a coach has just been incredible. So yes, I think it was absolutely a turning point. If you talk to people in the United States that are my age, I'm in my mid 50s, everyone remembers this team. And there's something about that. If you mention the name Karch Karat, oh yeah, Karch Karat, Steve, the guy with the spiky hair, this team caught the imagination of the United States. It lit a spark for the sport. It really captured the interest of the entire country, was glued to their TVs. And they didn't even know that volleyball was in the Olympics. Half the country, didn't even know that they were going to be interested in volleyball until this team went out there and started doing things that, it's all of a sudden, wow, this sport is very athletic. This sport is very beautiful. This sport is fun to watch. I mean, all these things came out of, there wasn't a lot of primetime volleyball. I mean, think about it. All of a sudden, they're on ABC Sports in the middle of the Olympics. Millions of people are watching, and it kept building. The Olympics are 2 weeks long, so they kept winning, and the commentators would talk. This team has a chance, and so yes, and then of course there's the legacy of some of the things they were doing on the court, which we talked about, the American system, which involves two passers back there, and then. sort of, I don't know how to describe it, but it's, the sort of audible system where they could call plays while they were in the mix of swinging from one left to right. And Dusty Dvorak was such an incredibly talented setter and controlled that offense. And so for all of those reasons, it really was a turning point for the sport, at least in the United States. And I think in some sense globally too. It was the end of an era almost for the Soviets. I guess the Soviets came back and played in '88, but it was a passing of the guard. You asked, you made a comment about the interesting American culture and sort of observing America from afar. And I feel like I learned something about America in writing this book, in that when I took a step back and looked at the individual journeys of these individuals, they came from different backgrounds. There were the Easties and the Westies, right? There were players that came from the East Coast that didn't always get along with the players on the West Coast. And then some of these players, as I mentioned, Karch and Aldis Berzins came from Lithuania. I think it was Lithuania. He came from a country in the Eastern Bloc. As immigrants, a lot of these players were second generation immigrant families. And we call ourselves the melting pot, right? The United States is a melting pot, so many cultures from around the world. And what I realized as I was writing the book was that this is a microcosm. It was a smaller melting pot, but that's what the team had to learn, how to get along and work together. And I think when America is at its best, when we're living up to our ideals, the American ideals, it's about people from different backgrounds and cultures all over the world coming together and learning how to work together. And so I felt just very proud in that this is a story that I guess transcends. It could transcend sport in some way, because no matter what we do in life, whether you're working for a business in Chile or in Europe or anywhere, we tend to be working in teams, and those teams tend to be people from different backgrounds, right? And maybe it's accentuated a little bit in the United States, but that's how it is nowadays. And so how do we work together? We have to work together as humans to achieve great things. And so that's what the story is really at its root, what it's really about.
It was not only in the United States an inspiration, but also for the world. In Chile, for example, after watching this game, I remember in the afternoon after the game, watching in television, I had the game, and we were all talking about this team. We were this guy, and Chile, and I know certain that in all the world, people wanted to play like the American way, the system, and not only the playing styles, but also their style. For example, what you said about the hair of Steve Stevens, or using T-shirt with short sleeves, for example. This time we use long sleeve T-shirts to play volleyball. Or not using knee pads as Kat Curley does. So it was very inspirational, not only in the way of playing the game, but also a way to look ourselves as the American. Used to number 13, for example. I used number 13 like that Parrot, for example, and many other details that maybe are not very important for the people who doesn't know much about volleyball, but for us it was very, very inspirational. So I wanted to ask you now, Sean, about your next projects. Do you have some project related to volleyball, or your another kind of projects?
Well, so the next project for me related to volleyball is to try to help this book become a movie. And I've touched on that, but there really is a group in Hollywood that are taking this story around. It could be a documentary first, because documentaries are a little less expensive, less investment required, and they're very popular right now. I don't know if they're popular in Chile, but in the United States, sports documentaries.
It's very, very strong way of watching TV.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people watch The Last Dance here in the United States, which was about Michael Jordan, and people, kind of fascinated by that story. And people don't know this story, which I think is helpful for it, in that they will get to discover it if we can bring it to the screen. And it turns out there's a lot of footage I know you can get on YouTube and you can see things, and sometimes it's a little grainy, but USA Volleyball, it turns out, has a lot of footage.
Yes.
I didn't write about this in the book. I regret not writing at least a little bit, but there was a movie. The players, it was Dusty Dvorak, who had a sort of a connection to some Hollywood connection, and they decided to write a movie and film part of the movie. It was a drama movie called Spiker, and you can still get it. Have you seen it, Alfredo?
Some photos on internet, but I didn't understand what it says, because there's some guy playing, and behind him is Craig Bagg, and no, this Dave Sanders. Or no, I didn't understand very well. It is a Dusty Dvorak a movie project. Wow.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yes. And so they filmed it, that practices, and they got Doug Beal and Bill Neville to agree to these guys to come in and do some filming. They tried to get Doug to act in it. He wouldn't, he's like, forget it, it didn't do that well, but it's just a testament to the creativity of this team, that somehow they figured out how to get a movie made there. And so there's a lot of footage, basically, and that could help bring the story to life, and that would be fantastic. And then, they do want to also make a drama. So, I might serve as sort of a consultant advisor to that project, and if it can get off the ground. I'm also just constantly, looking for other stories. I'm going to write another book. I haven't decided what, but the theme I'd like to continue to explore is, how do groups and individuals get better and improve and become the best they can be? And I got to tell one story through volleyball. My next one probably won't be volleyball. It will probably be maybe another sport, maybe a sort of adventure kind of story, or something about technology, a team that developed but it will be a true story, because I like to write nonfiction, but I don't know yet. But I do want to tell more stories, because I think, we can learn from this team, but this team doesn't have all the answers. We know there's lots of different ways to become the best. And I think if I zeroed in on just about any Olympic team you're going to get that wins a gold medal, you're going to learn something about what made them great. And so I'm going to keep looking. I've got some ideas. I haven't settled on anything. I do know that to write a book, you have to really love the subject. And so I have to make sure that whatever I go into next, I better really love the story, because it's almost like your spouse. In fact, my wife's like, don't write another book. I'm not going to see you for like 5 years. But I do hope I do.
I cross fingers that it would be possible to watch this documentary or a film. It would be fantastic. And finally, Sean, I wanted to thank you again for your time. I want to also to invite people to buy this book. Here's this fantastic book. I won't put in my copy the links to do this, because I think it's a must book for anybody who loves volleyball. And I also cross finger that someday we have it in Spanish or Portuguese. I don't know, in Italian, because I think it's a very, very fundamental part of our volleyball history, of our world volleyball history, and so inspirational. So I wanted to thank you again, Sean, for your time. It was amazing to know you. I could speak hours and hours about volleyball and your book, but we have time limited. So I wanted to thank you. Send your best wishes from Chile, the far south of the world, and keep you invited to. Hopefully, you can watch my channels and follow my platform. So thank you again, Sean. The best wishes for you, for your family, and your next project, and hopefully the documentary or the film of the If Gold is Our Destiny, how a team of Mavericks came together for Olympic glory. Absolutely amazing, this book.
Thank you, Alfredo. It was really a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it. Let's keep our fingers crossed that there's going to be a movie down the road.
Super.
All right, bye-bye.